a shocking event is recorded in the Holy Scriptures, a moment so profound and unsettling that it has echoed through millennia, whispered in hushed tones and debated by scholars, yet often shielded from the pulpits of mainstream teaching. A rebellion of angels, a descent from heaven to earth, and an unsanctioned union with human women that would forever alter the course of creation. The Bible doesn't hide this. It lays it bare in its opening pages, a stark warning of cosmic treason. But that's just the beginning of a story far more detailed and terrifying than many realize. A story preserved in a book considered scripture by some of the earliest followers of Christ, the ancient and enigmatic Book of Enoch. In the epoch before the Great Deluge, when the memory of Eden was still a fresh wound in the heart of humanity, the earth was young and teeming with life. In those days, during the time of Jared, the father of Enoch, mankind began to multiply across the face of the continents, and their daughters were born unto them, possessing a beauty that was both a divine gift and a profound peril. Above the nascent world, in the celestial realms, a host of spiritual beings, the sons of God, were tasked with a sacred duty. They were the watchers, appointed to oversee, guide, and protect the fledgling human race, ensuring that the divine order established at creation remained unbroken. Their existence was one of light, purity, and unwavering devotion to the Most High. Yet, from their heavenly vantage point, their gaze fell upon the daughters of men, and a corruption, insidious and ancient, began to take root in their immortal hearts. What began as admiration twisted into an obsessive longing, a spiritual sickness that festered in the core of their being. They watched as human women lived, loved, and bore children, and the simplicity and earthliness of that existence, so alien to their own ethereal nature, became an object of intense, forbidden desire. The purity of their mission was eclipsed by a lust that defied the very laws of their creation. They were spirits, and humanity was flesh. Their realms were meant to be separate, a divine ordinance set in place by God himself. To breach this divide was not merely a transgression but an act of cosmic treason, a rebellion against the architecture of the universe. The leader among them, a powerful chieftain of the angelic order named Semyaza, perceived the growing unrest in his brethren. He saw the same forbidden fire in their eyes that burned within his own spirit. He understood the catastrophic potential of their shared desire, the irrevocable damage it would unleash upon both heaven and earth. Yet, the temptation had grown too strong to contain. He called a council, gathering 200 of the most powerful watchers, those who had fallen furthest into this shared obsession. They assembled not in the light-filled courts of heaven, but in the liminal space between realms, their thoughts heavy with a treasonous proposal. Semyaza's voice, once a vessel of divine praise, now carried the weight of rebellion. "I know your hearts," he began, his gaze sweeping over the silent, conflicted host. "I see the desire that consumes you, but I also fear the consequence. This is a great sin, a path from which there may be no return. If we do this thing, and the Most High calls us to account, who will bear the blame for this transgression?" He paused, letting the gravity of his words settle. "If you are hesitant, if you fear the punishment, then let it be known that I will not force this path upon you. But if you proceed, know that I fear I alone will pay the penalty for this great sin." His words were a calculated test, a final offering of caution laced with the irresistible pull of shared culpability. But the seeds of rebellion had already sprouted. Another of their leaders, Azazel, stepped forward, his presence radiating a defiant energy. "This is our desire," he declared, his voice echoing the sentiment of all who were gathered. "Why should we who are mighty and glorious be denied the simple joys we see in the flesh below? Let us proceed. Let us take an oath, binding ourselves to this purpose, so that none may turn back." A murmur of assent rippled through the celestial company. The path of caution was rejected. The die was cast. Their destination was decided. The summit of Mount Hermon, a towering peak that scraped the sky, a fitting place for an oath that would forever scar creation. The name of this mountain itself would become a testament to their sin, for Hermon is linked to the Hebrew word for anathema, or a binding curse. It was upon this peak that they descended from the heavens, a cascade of falling stars. abandoning their first estate and their sacred charge. The Bible itself records the shadow of this catastrophic event, though its account is terse, a chilling and enigmatic prologue to the story of the flood. The book of Genesis, chapter 6, states, "When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose." This simple passage, often overlooked or allegorized, speaks of a profound rupture in the created order. It is the biblical anchor for the terrible story that the ancient Book of Enoch details with unflinching clarity. Upon the snow-dusted peak of Mount Hermon, under the light of the moon, the 200 watchers gathered to perform their profane ritual. As the ancient text recounts, they sealed their conspiracy with a dreadful and irrevocable act. The Book of Enoch, chapter 6, preserves the very words of their pact, and they all swore together and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon, because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. They cursed themselves, invoking damnation upon any who would forsake the pact, thereby sealing their collective fate. Their rebellion was no longer a secret desire. It was a declared war against the Almighty. From that cursed summit, they descended into the world of mortals, no longer as guardians, but as predators. They appeared before the daughters of men, not as terrifying spectral beings, but in forms of beauty and light, cloaked in a deceptive glory. They were charismatic, powerful, and possessed knowledge that seemed divine to the nascent human race. They took the women they desired, not through a holy covenant of marriage ordained by God, but through an act of spiritual violation, a defiling union of celestial and terrestrial. They taught them charms and enchantments, the art of seduction and ornamentation, corrupting their natural beauty with the veneer of forbidden knowledge. The unhallowed union bore monstrous fruit. The women conceived and gave birth to a new race of beings, creatures of immense size and insatiable appetite. They were the Nephilim, the fallen ones, giants of renown whose very existence was an abomination, a testament to the angels' sin. These were not merely large humans. They were hybrids, possessing the supernatural strength of their angelic fathers and the mortal flesh of their human mothers. Their presence on the earth marked the beginning of an age of terror and chaos, a time when the very fabric of creation began to unravel under the weight of this cosmic transgression. The world, once a place of order and potential, was now set on a path toward utter ruin, a path that would demand a divine cleansing of unimaginable proportions. The Watchers had made their choice, bound by a curse on a lonely mountain, and the consequences of their fall were only just beginning to bleed across the earth. The unholy consummation between the celestial Watchers and mortal women did not merely break a divine law, it tore a hole in the fabric of creation, and through that tear emerged a brood of horrors. The children born of this union were the Nephilim, a race of giants whose very existence was a blasphemy written in flesh and bone. In the beginning, humanity may have looked upon them with a perverse sense of awe. These were the children of the gods, towering figures of immense strength and stature, beings who seemed to bridge the gap between earth and heaven. But this awe quickly curdled into stark, unrelenting terror as the true nature of the giants was unleashed upon the world. Their growth was unnatural, rapid, and voracious. They were physical manifestations of their father's insatiable lust, a hunger that could never be filled. The Book of Enoch grimly chronicles their catastrophic impact. At first, they consumed the bounty of the earth, devouring all the toil and produce of mankind. The harvests of 100 fields were but a meal for one. The cattle, the sheep, and the fowl vanished into their gaping maws. The storehouses of humanity were emptied, and famine began to stalk the land, a gaunt spectre in the shadow of the giants. Humanity, once the stewards of the earth, now became slaves to the appetites of their monstrous offspring, working the soil to the point of exhaustion, only to feed the unholy progeny of the fallen angels. When the produce of the land was gone, and the animals were no more, the Nephilim, driven by their ceaseless hunger, turned their gaze upon their creators. They began to devour mankind. The biblical scholar and historian, Josephus, writing in the 1st century, alludes to this ancient tradition in his Antiquities of the Jews, where he speaks of the giants' deeds as acts of outrageous pride and contempt for all that was good. The world became a hunting ground. Villages were annihilated, their inhabitants consumed by the very beings who had been born from their own women. The air, once filled with the sounds of life and industry, now carried the screams of the prey and the guttural roars of the predators. In a final, horrific turn, when human flesh became scarce, the giants turned upon one another, and the earth was stained with the blood of their cannibalistic warfare. Yet, the corruption was not limited to this brutal physical destruction. The fallen watchers had brought with them more than just celestial seed. They carried the poison of forbidden knowledge, secrets of heaven that humanity was never meant to possess. They began to systematically untwist civilization, re-engineering society in their own rebellious image. Each of the chief angels introduced a specific corruption, a dark gift that would accelerate humanity's downfall. Azazel, one of the most powerful among them, taught humanity the art of war and vanity. As the Book of Enoch testifies, his teachings were devastatingly specific. It was he who showed men how to forge instruments of death. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. Before this, conflict had been local and primitive. Azazel introduced industrialized warfare. The clang of hammers on anvils became a constant drone as men, driven by a newfound avarice and bloodlust, forged weapons to kill one another with greater efficiency. Alongside this, he taught the arts of seduction and vanity. He revealed the secrets of bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. He taught women to adorn themselves not in modesty, but in pride and sensuality, turning beauty from a divine gift into a tool of corruption. Violence and vanity, war and worthlessness, these were Azazel's twin poisons. Other watchers contributed their own specialized forms of ruin. Semyaza, their leader, instructed men in sorcery and the occult arts, teaching them enchantments and how to cut roots for magical purposes. He replaced faith in God with reliance on dark rituals and demonic power. Barakijal taught astrology, Kokabel the deceptive secrets of the constellations, and Sariel the course of the moon, not as science, but as tools for divination and fatalism. Humanity was taught to look to the stars for answers, rather than to the creator of the stars. This deluge of forbidden knowledge created a society steeped in violence, sorcery, pride, and idolatry. It was a world entirely remade by the rebellious intellect of the fallen angels. The sacred text of Genesis provides a stark and chilling summary of this period. Its verses act as a divine confirmation of the horrors detailed in Enoch. The Bible says in Genesis 6, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God went in to the daughters of men and they bore children to them. They were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." This renown was not one of honor, but of terror. The very next verse reveals the ultimate consequence of their presence and the watchers' teachings. "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." The earth itself began to groan under the weight of this accumulated sin. The violence was not just between giants or between men, but it saturated the very soil. The planet was filled with bloodshed, oppression, and injustice. The divine order had been shattered. Lawlessness reigned supreme. The cries of the innocent, the blood of the slain, and the anguish of a creation being torn apart at the seams rose up from the face of the earth. It was a silent scream, unheard by the corrupt and deafened ears of mankind, but it pierced the heavens. The angels who had remained loyal in their celestial post, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, looked down from their sanctuary and saw the world drowning in blood. They saw the rampant injustice, the monstrous abominations that walked the land, and the twisted souls of a humanity that had abandoned its creator for the cheap and deadly trinkets of fallen angels. The cry of the earth had reached the gates of heaven, and it demanded an answer. The age of rebellion was nearing its zenith, and the time for divine intercession was at hand. A righteous man still walked the earth, a prophet named Enoch, and his destiny was about to intersect with the fate of both angels and men. As the cacophony of a tormented creation rose to the heavens, it was met not with indifference, but with a holy and terrible sorrow. From the sanctuary of the celestial realm, the archangels Michael, the protector, Uriel, the light of God, Raphael, the healer, and Gabriel, the messenger, looked down upon the carnage. They saw the earth submerged in blood, the ground itself crying out from the violence it was forced to drink. They saw the abominable giants, monuments of sin, stalking the land, and a humanity so thoroughly corrupted that the divine spark within them was all but extinguished. The archangels carried this horrifying report before the throne of the Ancient of Days, the Lord of Spirits, and a divine council was held in the highest heaven. The age of angelic silence was over. The time for divine judgment had come, but this judgment would not be delivered by a thunderclap from a distant heaven. It would be pronounced by a human voice. In the midst of this world drowning in wickedness, there walked a man unlike any other. His name was Enoch, the seventh patriarch in the line of Adam. In a generation whose every thought was continually evil, Enoch's heart was an altar of devotion. The scriptures offer a simple yet profound description of his life. Enoch walked with God. This was not a casual stroll, but a deep, abiding, and constant communion. While the world sought forbidden knowledge from fallen spirits, Enoch sought wisdom from the source of all life. While men built altars to their own pride and violence, Enoch cultivated a sanctuary of peace and righteousness within his soul. He was a beacon of light in an age of absolute darkness, a lone witness to the divine order in a world that had embraced chaos. It was this singular purity, this unwavering fellowship with the Most High, that set him apart for a mission of terrifying and unprecedented significance. The call came to him not in a dream, but in a vision so vivid it transcended the boundaries of flesh and spirit. The heavens seemed to peel back, and a light more brilliant than 1,000 suns enveloped him. From this divine effulgence, the holy ones, the messengers of the throne, appeared before him. Their voices were like the sound of rushing waters, yet they spoke to him with a clarity that pierced his very soul. They told him to shed his fear, for he had found favor with the Lord of Spirits. They had come to anoint him as a prophet, a scribe of righteousness, and a messenger to a world that had forgotten its maker. His commission was twofold. First, he was to be a prophet to humanity, to preach righteousness and warn of the coming judgment. But his second task was far more daunting, a role no mortal had ever borne. He, a man of flesh and blood, was to be God's emissary to the very angels who had abandoned their heavenly station. He was to leave the familiar world of men and seek out the rebel watchers. He was to stand before these once glorious, now corrupted celestial beings and pronounce upon them a sentence of eternal damnation. This singular event, Enoch's journey as a human herald to fallen immortals, stands as a pivotal, sacred historical moment in the chronicle of the pre-Diluvian world, a testament to God's authority over all realms, both spiritual and physical. Enoch was to inform them that their reign of terror was at an end. He was to tell them, "You will have no peace, nor will you find forgiveness." The judgment was absolute and unyielding. Their monstrous offspring, the Nephilim, would be slaughtered before their very eyes, a horrific spectacle of divine justice. And they, the watchers themselves, would be bound and cast into darkness to await the final, great day of judgment. It was a message devoid of mercy, for their crime was not a simple mistake, but a fundamental betrayal of their very nature, a pollution of creation at its source. Strengthened by the divine presence, Enoch accepted the perilous mission. He traveled from his home, venturing into the desolate lands now controlled by the progeny of the Watchers. The journey was a descent into hell on earth. He walked through valleys stained with the blood of men and giants, past villages reduced to rubble and bones, the air thick with the stench of death and decay. Yet, he walked in a bubble of divine peace, a man protected by an authority far greater than the corrupted power of his adversaries. He found them huddled together in a place of despair, between the great mountains of Lebanon and the lesser peak of Senecer. The proud, defiant spirits who had descended upon Mount Hermon were gone. In their place were beings consumed by a gnawing dread. They had begun to feel the consequences of their severance from the divine light. Their leader, Azazel, and the chieftain Semiaza were there among them, their celestial glory now dimmed, replaced by an aura of terror and profound grief. They were gathered together, weeping, their immortal hearts finally comprehending the eternal weight of their sin. Into this assembly of fallen majesty stepped Enoch, the mortal prophet. A hush fell over the grieving host as he approached. They saw in him not the frailty of a human, but the unyielding authority of the one who had sent him. His voice, steady and clear, cut through their lamentations. He recounted their crimes, reading from the heavenly tablets the full record of their rebellion, their lust, and the tide of blood they had unleashed upon the earth. He spoke of the cry of the innocent, which had reached the throne of God. And then he delivered the verdict. The impact was immediate and devastating. The ancient Book of Enoch captures their reaction with stark simplicity. And I went and told them all, and they were all afraid, and fear and trembling seized them. Their self-pity turned to sheer terror. The finality of the judgment, no peace, no forgiveness, shattered their last vestiges of angelic pride. In that moment, they saw the infinite chasm that now separated them from their Creator, a chasm they themselves had carved. This scene, a human man standing in judgment over fallen angels, is a stunning reversal of the expected cosmic order. But the Bible itself may hint that this is part of God's ultimate design for his redeemed people. In a provocative challenge to a later generation, the Apostle Paul asks the church in Corinth, "Do you not know that we are to judge angels?" 1 Corinthians 6-3. Enoch's commission can be seen as the first dramatic foreshadowing of this incredible truth, that righteous humanity, through its union with God, is elevated to a position of authority that transcends even the celestial hierarchy. Overwhelmed by the verdict, the fallen angels did the only thing they could. They begged him. They implored Enoch, the very man who had just condemned them, to act as their intercessor. They asked him to write a petition on their behalf, a formal plea for mercy, and to read it aloud in the presence of the Lord of heaven. Their hope was that a prayer delivered by a righteous man might succeed where their own corrupted voices could not. Enoch, ever the scribe of righteousness, agreed to record their plea, to fulfill his duty to its absolute end. He took their desperate, sorrowful petition and began his ascent, not back to the world of men, but upward, toward the very throne of God, to see if there was any hope at all for the architects of the world's ruin. Having accepted the desperate, tear-stained petition of the fallen watchers, Enoch departed from their miserable assembly. He traveled to the lands of Dan, to the southwest of Mount Hermon, and sat by the waters there. As he read aloud the words of their plea, a deep sleep, a trance of the spirit, fell upon him. He was no longer by a river in the mortal world, but was caught up in a vision, his soul untethered from his body and ascending toward the heavens. This was not a journey of physical steps, but a spiritual pilgrimage into the very heart of divine power, an experience that would become a cornerstone for the ancient Jewish mystical tradition known as Merkabah, where seekers meditated on the scriptures to replicate Enoch's visionary ascent to the celestial throne room. The vision began with clouds, which summoned him, and a mist that called to him. The course of the stars and the flashes of lightning hastened his journey, and celestial winds gave him wings, lifting him higher and higher. He was brought to a wall built of crystals, surrounded by tongues of living fire. A sense of holy dread, a fear born of utter awe, began to permeate his being. He passed through this fiery barrier and entered a great house, also built of hailstones and crystal. Its ceiling was a tapestry of stars and lightning, its floor a sheet of pristine crystal, and in its midst were fiery cherubim. The sheer, unadulterated holiness of the place was overwhelming, a purity so intense it felt both exhilarating and terrifying. But this was merely the antechamber. Beyond it lay another house, greater than the first, its every portal blazing with fire. Its magnificence was beyond description, its glory immeasurable. The floor was pure fire, and from above blazed lightning and the path of the stars. And within this second house, Enoch beheld the throne. It was high and exalted, its appearance like frost, Yet the throne itself was of crystal, and its wheels were like the shining sun. From beneath the throne issued rivers of flaming fire, so bright and terrible he could not look upon them directly. And seated on the throne was the great glory, the Ancient of Days, his raiment more brilliant than the sun and whiter than any snow. No angel could enter this house or look upon the face of the one who sat upon the throne for the honor and splendor of his presence. A sea of fire raged around him, and a great fire stood before him. The 10,000 times 10,000 who comprised the heavenly host stood in his presence, yet he needed no counsel. Overwhelmed by this vision of absolute majesty and power, Enoch fell upon his face, his body trembling, his spirit dissolving in the infinite light. Then the Lord, the Ancient of Days, called to him with his own voice, not with wrath, but with the immense and solemn authority of the Creator of all things. "Come hither, Enoch," the voice commanded, "and hear my holy word." He was lifted to his feet and brought to the very doorway of the house of fire, his head still bowed, unable to raise his eyes from the floor of living flame. The divine verdict was then pronounced, not merely as a rejection of the Watcher's plea, but as a lesson in cosmic order, a clarification of the chasm between the spiritual and the material. The voice of God addressed Enoch, explaining the irreversible nature of the Watcher's crime. As recorded in the Book of Enoch, chapter 15, the Lord said, "Go, say to the Watchers of heaven, who have sent thee to intercede for them, you should intercede for men, and not men for you. Wherefore have ye left the high, holy, and eternal heaven, and lain with women, and defiled yourselves with the daughters of men, and taken to yourselves wives, and done like the children of earth, and begotten giants as your sons? You have been in heaven, but all the mysteries had not yet been revealed to you. And you knew worthless ones, and these in the hardness of your hearts you have made known to the women. And through these mysteries women and men work much evil on earth. Say to them, therefore, you have no peace." The judgment was final because their sin was a willful perversion of their very being. They were spiritual beings, intended for the eternal holy heavens. They had abandoned their glory, their first estate, for a temporary and corrupting union with flesh, a realm to which they did not belong. They had been privy to a measure of heavenly knowledge, yet they had despised it in favor of worthless, earthly secrets, which they then used to poison the very race they were meant to protect. They had inverted the divine order. Men who are born of earth, die, and return to it, were in need of an advocate. But for the Watchers, who were created as eternal spirits of the living heaven, to abandon their nature for the ways of mortal corruption, for this there could be no remedy. This absolute decree stands in stark contrast to the hope later revealed in the Bible for fallen humanity. The Watchers had no mediator, no one who could bridge the chasm they had created between themselves and God. But the New Testament reveals a profound and different reality for mankind. It speaks of a great mystery, that God himself would provide a mediator for humanity, his own Son. As the Apostle Paul would later write in 1 Timothy 2-5, "For there is one God and one mediator between God and mankind, the man Christ Jesus." The angels fell from a position of light and knowledge, and their judgment was swift and permanent. Humanity, born of dust and deceived into sin, was offered a path to redemption through a Redeemer who would share in their humanity. For the Watchers there was no such provision. Their choice was absolute, and so was their condemnation. The vision faded. Enoch found himself back by the waters of Dan, the weight of the divine message pressing down on his soul. He had ascended to the highest heaven and stood before the throne of God. He had carried the plea of the fallen and had received the unalterable reply. His mission was nearly complete. All that remained was to return to the place of weeping, where the rebellious angels huddled, to extinguish their final, desperate ember of hope, and to deliver the news of their eternal, unending doom. Enoch returned from the heights of heaven, his spirit heavy with the weight of immutable truth. The vision of the throne of glory, the rivers of fire, and the voice of the Ancient of Days had seared itself upon his soul. He carried not a message of hope, but a decree of cosmic justice, an ironclad verdict from which there was no appeal. He sought out the rebel Watchers, who remained huddled in their place of mourning, their once brilliant forms now cloaked in an aura of dread. They saw him approach, and a flicker of desperate longing ignited in their sorrowful eyes. They looked to this mortal man, their last, impossibly slim hope, to be their advocate. But Enoch's face was not that of a merciful intercessor. It was the face of a scribe who had faithfully recorded a sealed and final judgment. He stood before the assembled host of the fallen, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of their weeping, which now faltered in anticipation. He did not soften the blow or offer words of comfort. He spoke the words of God as he had heard them in the house of fire, his voice a clear and steady echo of the divine sentence. "You should intercede for men, and not men for you," he began, his words cutting through their grief like shards of crystal. He recounted their crime in its stark reality. They had abandoned their celestial station, their eternal, holy nature, to defile themselves with the fleeting and fragile flesh of mortals. They had traded heavenly mysteries for worthless knowledge, unleashing violence, sorcery, and vanity upon a world they were sworn to protect. He looked upon Semyaza, their leader, and Azazel, their corrupting teacher, and delivered the final, soul-crushing proclamation: "You have no peace." The last ember of hope in the hearts of the watchers was extinguished. A new kind of horror descended upon them, not just fear, but the full, crushing realization of eternity. Their doom was not merely a punishment, but an intrinsic consequence of their choice. But the verdict did not end with them. God's judgment was a cleansing fire that would address every facet of their rebellion, beginning with the monstrous fruit of their sin. Enoch explained the terrible fate awaiting their progeny. The Nephilim, the giants who had terrorized the earth, would not be allowed to live out their unnatural lives. The archangel Gabriel was to be sent forth with a mission of inciting a divine civil war. The giants, the bastards, and the reprobates would be filled with a spirit of slaughter and turned against one another. Their strength would be used for their own annihilation. And the watchers, their fathers, would be made to witness the carnage. They would watch as their powerful sons, the symbols of their rebellion, tore each other apart in a frenzy of bloodlust until none were left standing. Even then, the curse of their offspring would not be fully purged. Enoch relayed the words of the Almighty. Upon their death, the physical bodies of the giants would perish, but their spirits would remain. They would rise from the slaughter, not to ascend to heaven or rest in the earth, but to become a plague upon it. They would be known as the evil spirits, disembodied entities whose nature was born of both the spiritual and the carnal. They would haunt the world, afflicting, corrupting, attacking, and tempting the hearts of men. A spiritual cancer lingering in creation until the final consummation of the great judgment. With the fate of the Nephilim sealed, the judgment turned to the fallen watchers themselves. They would not be destroyed, not yet. Their punishment was to be a long, dark lesson in divine sovereignty. Enoch described how the great archangels would descend to execute the sentence. Raphael was commanded to seek out Azazel, the architect of so much human misery. The Book of Enoch details his fate with terrifying specificity. And again the Lord said to Raphael, "Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him therein, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him dwell there forever, and cover his face that he may not see light." The one who taught the world vanity and the art of shining metals would be entombed in utter blackness, crushed beneath unyielding stone, blinded and alone until the day of judgment, when he would be cast into the eternal fire. Michael, the commander of the loyal host, received the order to bind Semyaza and the rest of his co-conspirators. They were to be bound fast, under the hills and in the hidden valleys of the earth. Imprisoned for a span of 70 generations, they would remain there, unseen and unheard, enduring their punishment as the ages of human history passed above them, a testament to the consequences of cosmic treason. This binding of the fallen angels is not merely a tale from an obscure book. It is a memory that echoes within the canon of Scripture itself. The New Testament apostle Jude, the brother of James, issued a stark warning to the early church that directly references this ancient event. Speaking of false teachers, he compares them to the angels who rebelled in the days before the flood, writing, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode. He has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Jude 1-6. The chains Jude speaks of are the very bonds described by Enoch, a story the early followers of Christ clearly knew and accepted as a foundational truth about the reality of spiritual warfare. Finally, the judgment expanded to encompass the entire world they had corrupted. The earth itself was groaning, so saturated with blood, violence, and defilement that it required a purification beyond any local skirmish or angelic binding. The wickedness of humanity, fed and nurtured by the Watcher's forbidden knowledge, had reached its apex. The Lord looked down and saw a world where every thought and intention of the human heart was only evil, continually. His heart was filled with grief. God's solution was as vast as the corruption itself. A great and terrible flood. The historical record of humanity is filled with echoes of this catastrophe. Nearly every ancient culture, from the Sumerians in their Epic of Gilgamesh to the indigenous peoples of the Americas, retains a memory of a world-destroying deluge. These are the fragmented historical memories of the singular, divinely ordained event that was now inevitable. The flood was not merely punishment, it was a baptism of the earth, a violent washing designed to cleanse the planet of the Nephilim stain, the lingering taint of forbidden magic and genetic and spiritual corruption that had brought creation to the brink of total ruin. The archangels carried out their grim tasks. Azazel was cast into the abyss. Semyaza and his followers were chained in the valleys of the earth. The giants turned on one another in a final suicidal war. And as the last of the monstrous Nephilim fell, and the cries of their disembodied spirits began to whisper on the wind, the heavens grew dark. The sentence was fully rendered. The fate of the angels was sealed. The fate of their children was complete. Now came the judgment for the world they had made. From the sky above, the first drops of rain began to fall, and so the rains began. The judgment long prophesied had arrived, not in a single clap of thunder, but as a steady, inexorable weeping from the heavens. The waters rose, and the old world, the world of monstrous giants and fallen gods, was washed away. The cries of the wicked were silenced by the rising tide. Their corruptions dissolved in the great cleansing. In the dark, deep places of the earth, the Watchers lay bound, their immortality now an instrument of their torment, listening as the world they ruined was drowned above them. They had reached for the pleasures of a world of flesh, and now they were imprisoned within its very foundations, divorced from both the heaven they had forsaken and the earth they had destroyed. The story of their fall is a solemn echo from a lost age, a profound and sorrowful reminder that the path of rebellion, though it may begin on a sunlit mountain peak, always ends in chains, in darkness, and in the profound silence of separation from God. This is the weight of ancient history, the deep and abiding truth that underpins the story of our own world, a world remade from the waters of judgment and grace. This account of the Watcher's descent is but the first part of a story that has been held in shadow for millennia. The journey of the prophet Enoch is far from over. His greatest revelations and most perilous travels are yet to come. To continue this sacred exploration with us, to uncover the prophecies and visions that still lie hidden within these ancient texts, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Become a part of this community as we seek to understand the sacred mysteries of the past and their powerful implications for our world today. Follow us so you do not miss the next chapter in this unfolding saga.